turn now to the first of several questions from our partners at Facebook. They were selected from a curated group of people we've been following of undecided voters. The first comes from Claudia Luz, a 54-year-old woman who works as a program manager at a public affairs cable network in Madison, Wisconsin. And she writes, Wisconsin is number one in African-American male incarceration, according to a University of Wisconsin study. They found that Wisconsin's incarceration rate for black men, which is at 13%, was nearly double the country's rate. What can we do across the nation to address this? Senator Sanders.
This is one of the great tragedies in our country today. And we can no longer continue to sweep it under the rug. It has to be dealt with. Today, a male African-American baby born today stands a 1 in 4 chance of ending up in jail. That is beyond unspeakable. So what we have to do is do radical reform of a broken criminal justice system. What we have to do is end over-policing in African-American neighborhoods. The reality is that both African-American community and the white community do marijuana at about equal rates. The reality is 4 times as many blacks get arrested for marijuana. Truth is that far more blacks get stopped for traffic violations. The truth is that sentencing for blacks is higher than for whites. We need fundamental police reform. Clearly, when we talk about a criminal justice system, I would hope that we can all agree that we are sick and tired of seeing videos on television of unarmed people, often African Americans, shot by police officers. What we have got to do is make it clear that any police officer who breaks the law will, in fact, be held accountable.
I completely agree with Senator Sanders. The first speech I gave in this campaign back in April was about criminal justice reform and ending the era of mass incarceration. The statistics from Wisconsin are particularly troubling because it is the highest rate of incarceration for African Americans in our nation, twice the national average. And we know of the tragic, terrible event that led to the death of Dontre Hamilton right here in Milwaukee. A young man, unarmed, who should still be with us. His family certainly believes that, and so do I. So we have work to do. There have been some good recommendations about what needs to happen. President Obama's Policing Commission came out with some. I have fully endorsed those. But we have to restore policing that will actually protect the communities that police officers are sworn to protect. And then we have to go after sentencing, and that's one of the problems here in Wisconsin because so much of what happens in the criminal justice system doesn't happen at the federal level, it happens at the state and local level. But I would also add this. There are other racial discrepancies, really systemic racism in this state as in others, in education, in employment, in the kinds of factors that too often lead from a position where young people, particularly young men, are pushed out of school early, are denied employment opportunities. So when we talk about criminal justice reform and ending the era of mass incarceration, we also have to talk about jobs, education, housing, and other ways of helping communities do better.
Nothing that Secretary Clinton said do I disagree with. This mandatory sentencing, very bad idea, takes away discretion from judges. We have got to demilitarize local police departments so they do not look like occupying armies. We have got to make sure that local police departments look like the communities they serve in their diversity. And where we are failing abysmally is in the very high rate of recidivism we see. People are being released from jail without the education, without the job training, without the resources they need to get their lives together. And then we're shocked that they end up back in jail again. So we have a lot of work to do. But here is a pledge that I've made throughout this campaign, and it's really not a very radical pledge. When we have more people in jail, disproportionately African American and Latino, than China does, a communist authoritarian society 4 times our size, here's my promise. At the end of my first term as president, we will not have more people in jail than any other country. We will invest in education and jobs for our kids, not incarceration and more jails.
Secretary Clinton, I was talking recently with a 23-year-old black woman who voted for President Obama because she said she thought relations between the races would get better under his leadership and his example. Hardly anyone believes that they have. Why do you think race relations would be better under a Clinton presidency? What would you do that the nation's first African-American president has not been able to?
Well, I'm just not sure I agree completely with that assessment. I think under President Obama, we have seen a lot of advances. The Affordable Care Act has helped more African Americans than any other group to get insurance, to be taken care of. But we also know a lot more than we did. We have a lot more social media. We have everybody with a cell phone. So we are seeing the dark side of the remaining systemic racism that we have to root out in our society. I think President Obama has set a great example. I think he has addressed a lot of these issues that have been quite difficult, but he has gone forward. Now what we have to do is to build on an honest conversation about where we go next. We now have much more information about what must be done to fix our criminal justice system. We now have some good models about how better to provide employment, housing, and education. So I think what President Obama did was to exemplify the importance of this issue as our first African-American president and to address it both from the president's office and through his advocacy, such as working with young men and Mrs. Obama's work with young women. But we can't rest. We have work to do, and we now know a lot more than we ever did before. So it's going to be my responsibility to make sure we move forward to solve these problems that are now out in the open. Nobody can deny them. To use the Justice Department, as we just saw, where they have said they're going to sue Ferguson, that entered into a consent agreement and then tried to back out. So we're going to enforce the law. We're going to change policing practices. We're going to change incarceration practices. But we're also going to emphasize education, jobs, and housing.
Senator Sanders.
Well, I think, Judy, what has to be appreciated is that as a result of the disastrous and illegal behavior on Wall Street, millions of lives were hurt. People lost their jobs, their homes, their life savings. Turns out that the African American community and the Latino community were hit especially hard. As I understand it, the African American community lost half of their wealth as a result of the Wall Street collapse. So when you have childhood African American poverty rates of 35%, when you have youth unemployment at 51%, when you have unbelievable rates of incarceration, which, by the way, leaves the children back home without a dad or even a mother, clearly we are looking at institutional racism. We are looking at an economy in which the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and sadly in America today, in our economy, a whole lot of those poor people are African American.
So race relations would be better under a Sanders presidency than they've been?
Absolutely, because what we will do is say, instead of giving tax breaks to billionaires, we are going to create millions of jobs for low-income kids so they're not hanging out on street corners. We're going to make sure that those kids stay in school or are able to get a college education. And I think when you give low-income kids, African-American, white, Latino kids, the opportunities to get their lives together, they are not going to end up in jail. They're going to end up in the productive economy, which is where we want them.
Let me turn this on its head, because